Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Business of Property. I'm your host, Cheryl Leong from Property Development Australia. I'm going to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we virtually meet today and pay respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. At the Business of Property, we interview superstar guests in the property development space that share their expertise, their deals, their stories to help empower, build, and grow our community of developers. So, hello to Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube land. Oh, wherever you are. Give me a shout out if you're here with us today in the comments below. And what we have? We have actually an old friend. He's not old, but I'm saying that we've known each other since high school days in Brisbane. And he is now the planning manager of a very reputable town planning firm, DTS Group. And he has, over the years, actually done something with himself and utilized and built an extensive experience in the preparation, lodgment, management, and assessment of development applications throughout Queensland, particularly land subdivisions. So I'm going to invite into the business of property today Tim Smith from DTS Group. Tim, how are you doing?
Hey everyone, how are we?
Excellent. So, Tim, tell us a bit about your journey into property and, in particular, town planning.
Yeah, well, look, sure, it's come a long way since we did manual arts and graphics together through high school. So, obviously, that was sort of the founding of my, planning and planning interest through geography, legal studies, graphics, those
Mm,
sorts of subjects at school. Went to university up here in Brisbane, Queensland. Did the Bachelor of Urban Design and graduate diploma at QT. From there, just went through and started like I guess the rest of us, student planner placements or graduate planner placements for those of us that are planners. But across all of our industries, I'm sure we've all started as students or graduates in our respective
mm,
fields. Started in consultancy planning, did that for a couple of years, and then found my way into local government up here in southeast Queensland, where I worked in the local government for around about 3 years. It was an interesting time when I was there because we were part of the amalgamation of local governments here in Queensland back in 2005, 2006. I was also at that local authority at the time of a new planning scheme. So it was kind of exciting to be part of those periods of change. Uh, Pretty much did my 3 years there, felt like I'd achieved enough, I'd served the community, and went back into the private sector. Went into the private sector for another 6 years, and then found myself back at the same local government that I'd left earlier. And that was a great role that I had at that local government. We were a much bigger organisation by that point, certainly post amalgamation. And I fulfilled the role of the coordinator for DA planning for around about 4 years before finding myself back here at DTS in private consultancy, where I've been for the last 4 years. So, yeah, certainly seen a little bit through the different spheres of consultancy planning and also local government planning in two different stints. For those of us that have worked in local government or work with local governments, I'm sure we all know the challenges that those experiences
mhm,
have. Politically different environments and policy changes, and you're always responding to you know different influences over the years, and you're nothing static. So I thought that was a great opportunity to sort of see what it's like from a local government perspective and start to apply that and try and serve my clients here in the private sector.
fantastic. And would it be right to say that the fact that you have been on the inside to to some extent, you're able to navigate planning and applications a lot better, I guess. Is that the right way to look at it?
Yeah, look, I like to think so, Cheryl. Obviously, having spent, I guess, 7, 8 years, all up working in local government, I've seen the various applications come in. And look, I can't speak for every local authority, of course, but using that experience of being inside,
Mm,
knowing how. the DA teams have to manage all of the competing interests from the internal referrals to the community to the local councillor to upholding the council policy. It's kind of given me that insight that in this private world that I find myself in, trying to work out where you can kind of push on the policy. Understanding where council officers are likely to understand and appreciate maybe some commercial realities about being pragmatic and deciding it in a particular way, or where they're going to hold firm because that's where the policy position of the local authority is, and knowing that they've got to uphold that community expectation.
Yeah, yeah. And so where are you seeing now in and predominantly Southeast Queensland?
Mm.
What's happening? What are the trends and the types of application? Are you seeing some sort of trend in the popularity of some sort of developments as opposed to others?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the market here appears to be shifting more and towards the freehold lot space, and it has over the last couple of years. I guess the last major property boom that SEQ had, there seemed to be a lot of focus on multiple dwellings, apartments, and
Mm,
intensifying land uses in that respect. And don't get me wrong, those style of developments still predominant today. But with things, particularly over the last couple of years, with COVID and we had the home builder stimulus last year and these sorts of things. The aging population, the growing population, the need to supply affordable housing product in reasonably
mm,
good locations,
mm,
it is really driving development to the outskirts of, particularly in Brisbane. And you're looking towards your Western Growth Corridor, towards Ipswich. That's always been a hot spot. Around Logan in particular, you look at the suburbs like Park Ridge and Logan Reserve, and there's a lot of subdivision activity happening down there. Up through the Moreton Bay Regional Council area, you've got Narangba, Morayfield,
mm,
Burpengary,
mm,
and then up through Caloundra with the big Stocklands developments there as well.
mm,
All kind of on the fringe of the main periphery of the Brisbane Centre or Maroochydore or around that sort of Springwood centre in Logan. But they're able to provide these alternative housing products, diversity
mm,
in lot sizes, a little bit more affordable, and providing that product in a location where it's still reasonably close to services, highways, schools,
mm, mm.
universities, and the like.
Yeah, and I'm hearing a lot from whether it's real estate agents or buyers or developers that there's not enough stock at the
Oh,
moment. And
absolutely.
I'm sure you're hearing that. So is there, is it because of the lack of the government releasing land for development, or what's the deal there?
Yeah, look, I guess part of the challenge is you've got these competing ideals and competing thoughts where a state who here in Southeast Queensland has defined an urban footprint. I know that's a similar concept to other parts of the country, e.g. Melbourne. So there's an urban footprint which defines the urban growth, and everything beyond that is rural or agricultural and pretty much off limits to urban development. So from that respect, when you're looking at Southeast Queensland, we're kind of tied into this urban footprint area. Now, within that, there's no detailed assessment of the land value or the quality of that land for urban development. So the urban footprint in the regional plan for Southeast Queensland still captures everything which is impacted by regulated vegetation or koala habitat. Might be
Mm,
unsuitable because it's flood inundated. Might be unsuitable because it's earmarked for industrial development. So all of a sudden you've got quite a large number being an area that's set aside for urban development, and then you keep chipping away as you start taking out all of these constrained
mm,
pieces of land. So
mm,
you've got the conflict there where I guess the number that's portrayed as being available in terms of land supply is probably not realistic.
mm,
And the uptake as well of growth. So we all know that Southeast Queensland has been a targeted area for a long time for interstate migration, but also overseas arrivals. It slowed up a little bit for a couple of years. But again, with the world changing in the last 18 months to 2 years, when the borders are open, there's a lot of people coming into Queensland. And we've seen that
Mm.
anecdotally through a number of people that have relocated their families or have looked to relocate once the borders are open. And so there seems to be this massive migration of Southerners from Victoria and New South Wales into Queensland.
Because we're
Um,
sick of getting not locked down. That's it.
yeah, we don't do lockdowns up here
No,
too
no,
often. We
you
do them short and
look
sharp.
how
So
relaxed you look.
yeah, well, there's a whole lot of stuff happening outside, so it's not always relaxing. But yeah, well, hopefully, the borders are open as of next week, I think.
Mm,
So yeah, what we'll see is we'll see much more of that growth coming in,
yeah.
and that's now starting to chip away possibly at that land supply. That when we looked at
Mm,
the regional
mm,
plan last couple of years ago as part of the last revision, the forecast growth is obviously considered in terms of determining whether or not there's sufficient land. And I think perhaps with the growth that we're seeing in Queensland, particularly southeast
mm.
Queensland, over the last 18 months and what's likely to occur over the next 18 to 24, possibly we're going to be eroding that supply a little bit more quickly as well.
Mm, And so, I mean, like, there's one part of talking about sort of large rezoning and subdivision,
Yep.
which also, you're talking about migration. Which is why we're seeing a whole lot of interest in the small lot subdivision
Yep.
space as well, which is what we like to talk about today, which is around, our whole topic is mastering subdivision projects in
Mm,
Southeast Queensland. So,
mm.
um, just so happened you put together a presentation for us to go through to highlight some of the things for developers here who are looking to do subdivision in Queensland. Let's bring that up and let's go through a few things here.
Yeah, great.
And so, anyone that's listening, if you're doing subdivisions, particularly the small lot subdivisions in Queensland, you might be doing large lot subdivisions. You've got questions for Tim, feel free to pop it in the comments below
Absolutely.
as well. And so, hopefully, Sheena can help us with. Oh, I think you
There
have
it
to do it.
is.
There we go. There you are.
That's great. So yeah, as I said, I've put together this PowerPoint. It's not a long one. I haven't gone into a heap of detail on it. I'm obviously conscious of the fact that I'm here in Brisbane. We've got all of you guys, some in Brisbane, some interstate, and you're all looking at different subdivision projects. So I've tried to keep this reasonably broad. There are some localised specifics at the end, but hopefully there's some things there that you can, I suppose, take away and apply to your own circumstances in your own geographic areas as well.
Mm,
So I'll just click through a couple of these slides. Now, mastering subdivisions is, it's something we're all trying to do. It's not always easy, but I tried to break it down into half a dozen, I guess, key things or elements to consider. It's understanding the why, understanding the who, understanding the where, understanding the what, the how, and then I try and capture some key thoughts and learnings in the final slide. So, very broadly, understand the why, how we do development, why we do development, and that's through this legislation process, this regulatory process. So, it may not be the easiest slide to see, depending on how you're viewing this. Appreciate that. Don't expect you to go into all the detail there, but it's just breaking down that here in Queensland we've got legislation, state plan instruments, statutory instruments, and local plan instruments. They're our four key tenets of how we operate the planning framework. The legislation is clearly the Planning Act here in
mm,
Queensland, the Planning Act 2016, very imaginatively named. We used to be integrated, we used to be sustainable. Now we're just the Planning Act. We've got the P&E Court Act that sits in behind that, and the planning regulation, which also gives weight and support to the Planning Act. State planning instruments are things like our state planning policy. So over the years, Queensland developed all of these different SPPs targeted on specific issues or elements. So you might have had an SPP for aviation facilities, an SPP
mm,
for agriculture, an SPP for extractive industry. And the list went on. It was all covering the various state interests. A couple of years ago, probably about 10 years ago, it was all consolidated into a single SPP. And that sits as the highest document in our planning framework. it's something that all planning schemes have to sort of bind to as well when they go through a state planning check. Statutory planning instruments are things like the Minister's guidelines. The Minister has a set of rules as to how a local authority can establish a planning scheme, how they can amend a planning scheme, how they may want to introduce a temporary local planning instrument, those sorts of things. Importantly for people like myself as a consultant planner, the statutory instruments also include what we call the DA rules. Again, highly imaginatively named, but the development assessment rules take out, I guess, a lot of the fundamental parts of the Act in the day-to-day practice of urban planning or development assessment. So that's our rules as to how we progress an application in terms of timeframes. Once we do one thing, what's the next step? Who's responsible for what? And how we go from lodgment to a decision. Our local planning instruments is pretty much our planning schemes. So every local authority in Queensland has a planning scheme. Some of them have schemes that are quite old. Generally, the I suppose less equipped councils or the smaller councils will carry through an older scheme through a number of different pieces of legislation, possibly from the Sustainable Planning Act or the Integrated Planning Act and earlier. More of the urbanised councils, the larger councils, will update their planning schemes more frequently. And you'll often see people like Brisbane City Council or council like Brisbane City Council will update their schemes several times a year. That all falls into that local planning instruments. I'll just jump through. Sorry,
And
Cheryl?
out of this, sorry, Tim, I mean, for the everyday developer, which of these instruments should they be, at very least, be familiar with?
Sure. Yeah, no, the local planning instruments. I guess as you embark on your development projects, you will be engaging with your consultant team. So you will have some planning specialists on board, and it'll be people like us that will navigate the Act, the regulatory steps, how you go from A to B to C to D. If you wanted that understanding, I guess, of the process, where the rubber hits the ground is your local planning instrument. That's where you can find your zoning, find out your site cover for multiple dwelling units, the minimum lot size for subdivisions and so forth. So it's definitely having that, at least that awareness about what your local planning instrument is, where you can find it, how it operates, and how to navigate through it. And I can show you some quick slides on that one later on as well.
Awesome.
So the Who. Well, the Who's actually an old British band, but look, you can read that more later on Wikipedia, so we'll skip over that one. But who else is the Who? So the Who is also the state government. It's also your local authorities. So who is a decision maker? It could be one of either, or it could be both. So I guess what's important to note when you're dealing with subdivisions here in Queensland, depending on where you are, and again, I've got more slides on this, so it may make a little bit more sense as we progress through the presentation, but your decision maker may very well be the state government in the instances where you are doing development or subdivision in what we call a priority development area. More often than not, though, your decision maker will be the local authority. Occasionally, you will find yourself with an application that still requires the state assessment through a referral agency, but your decision maker will still be your local authority. So it's important to understand in preparing an application or embarking on development, who is going to be the decision maker. Now, the who is not just limited to the decision maker, it's who you are, who your project team is, who do you need to talk to get the best out of your development. So who do you need to engage when you go about making a subdivision application? Well, clearly you need a surveyor. You probably need an urban planner. Do you need an engineer? Do you need an urban designer? Do you need an ecologist? Do you need an acoustic engineer? Do you need any of these other experts? So in thinking about how you assemble a project team, you've got to really do the investigation, I guess, into the site, where it sits in the planning framework, understand its constraints and its opportunities, and start to really form a project team that you can rely on around that to navigate you through each of those different areas of expertise to make the application process, I guess, as streamlined and as smooth as possible. So understanding the where. Now, these are some of those areas that I referred to earlier. So are you in a PDA, a priority development area? Now, within a priority development area, is the assessment manager the Economic Development Queensland, or is it the local government?
Mm.
Is there a plan of development in place that sets the development provisions? Is there a precinct plan which dictates your land use or your subdivision lot sizes? Are there zonings? The same can be said with your local planning scheme. And to Cheryl's earlier question, this is the area where you probably want to spend most of your time becoming familiar, because you need to understand, is your site within the priority infrastructure area of your local government infrastructure plan? Broadly, that's the area where council has earmarked urban development, has costed out the infrastructure supply where there is infrastructure. That correlates back to your zoning, to your precincts. Do you have overlays? Are you in a local plan? So straight away you can see there's a lot more to the plan scheme than just your zoning, because at any one of those points, be it an overlay or a local plan, it can take you down these other little sort of pathways of discovery. State overlays, don't forget those, because no matter what a plan scheme might say, there might be a state interest that sits on top.
Mm.
My list here is not exhaustive. You know, koalas, heritage, state transport, remnant veg, coastal matters, extractive industries. These are all just initial ones, but there's a whole lot of other state interests which may apply to the site or to the circumstances of your development, which you really have to get your head around, again, with your project team of experts to navigate any possible referral that you might have to the state.
And in terms of, again, the everyday developer
Yep.
doing their initial due diligence when they're just sort of skimming through hundreds of sites, where can they pick up all this sort of overlays and schemes? Where do they need to be able to go to as a first instance?
Yeah, I think that might actually be on the next one. I'll just, we can park that for the moment, show, because I do
Okay.
actually sort of
All
point
right.
you towards that. So understanding the what. So I guess this is just a quick slide to make people aware that here in Queensland, we do have prohibited development, but we've also got accepted development, which may not require a planning application or development approval. More often than not, though, you'll find your development probably sits in the third one. So accessible development. Within accessible development, we've got code and impact assessment. Those are just two different ways in which a development application may be assessed, and whether or not an application requires things like public notification. I don't want to sort of spend too much time on that, because I think Cheryl's question was quite useful before, and it's now understanding the how. So how do we find out all of this information that you guys need to know at your DD stage or as you're making an application? You can see here that most plan schemes will have a suite of PDFs of all of their maps, all of their overlays, all of their zones. Quite often, you'll have a regional council or a shire that big, and it'll be divided into a grid, and you've got to try and navigate your way through, on map D4 or whatever it is. That is useful, but most of the councils will also have an interactive function as well. The state government has an interactive function for the state referrals or those state interests. And importantly, here in Queensland, or at least in Southeast Queensland, we've got a couple of water retailer authorities. So unlike most councils probably around the country, and certainly unlike most councils here in Queensland, our bigger councils here in Southeast Queensland aren't controlling of water and sewer infrastructure and assets. There's a separate entity for those. And that separate entity is shared across a number of different local government areas. So, for example, Moreton Bay Regional Council and the Sunshine Coast Regional Council are supplied by Uniwater. Brisbane City Council, Ipswich have urban utilities. So when you want to start looking at your water infrastructure, your sewer connections, all of these sorts of things, you don't go to Brisbane City Council, you don't go to Ipswich City Council, you don't go to Moreton Bay Regional Council, because they'll just send you back to the water authority, which is Uniwater, and urban utilities. So they've also got interactive mapping. And what is great, I
Mm.
guess, is that across most of these councils, and certainly those two water entities, they use a fairly similar data set and online function. And if you ever have a chance to explore these interactive maps, I'm sure you'll find that there are familiarities between that system and the local authorities that you're used to dealing with across the country or across the state. I'm sure it's a common data set at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's just one example of a site assessment. This is our office here in South Brisbane. And I say start with the state interests because the state interests obviously prevail in a regulatory sense. And it's also the area that you want to square away that you've got no concerns there. You want to avoid seeing multiple colours and things hatched across your site.
Mm.
Now, this is obviously an urban environment here in South Brisbane where we are. But what you can see on this one here, there's a link. You're not going to remember that link, but you can always just do a Google search for SARA DA mapping, SARA DA mapping. That will take you to the State Assessment Referral Agency here in Queensland. And you can then start to determine and ascertain where some of your state interests might lie in relation to your site. So to the left of the screen, you can see that there's a number of little different subheadings. I haven't expanded on those. If you did expand on that, that would give some context to some of the colours that you can see there. But what that does is it shows all the different state interests on the map, although it could be a little bit harder to see, but you'll see that there's different colours to map the Brisbane River,
Mm.
which is the state interest, coastal matters and coastal issues. We've got some transport corridors mapped, some public transport mapped, some future tunnels mapped, and those sorts of things. So I guess in terms of key links to be familiar with for subdivisions here in Queensland, this is certainly one that you'd want to bookmark and
Mm.
check off against first. The first link there, or the first option there, as you can see, is the regional plan, and that's where we can find where that urban footprint is. You don't really want to be spending too much time thinking you've got this great site on the edge of the urban area. You can see all this development that's happened. It's a big paddock, and you think this is great. This will be the next growth front, and then you find out you're not actually in the urban footprint. So
Mm.
this is
Mm.
a great tool to square away what the good sites are and what the challenging sites are going to be from those state
Just
interests.
just on that point, Tim, when you're talking about, land outside of the urban footprint,
Yep,
are there still opportunities for developers to do? I mean, I'm in New South Wales, and so we've got developers who might amalgamate, a few hundred acres of land and do
yep,
sort of a spot rezoning.
yep.
Is that a similar thing in Queensland, where if it's outside of that urban area, that there's still opportunities if it's close enough to rezone? Um,
Unfortunately, not, Cheryl. Not
mm,
in terms of SEQ or Southeast Queensland. So
mm,
within the Southeast Queensland region, which extends from the border with New South Wales out to Toowoomba and up towards Gympie, so just past Noosa. So that urban footprint is fixed by regulation and it's fixed by the regional plan. The regional plan is very clear through the regulatory provisions that subdivision outside of the urban footprint is
mm,
limited to 100 hectares in size. So you could arguably amass a massive holding, and you might then yield two lots out of it. Beyond the Southeast Queensland region. So as you get to Toowoomba and head west, or as you head north of Gympie, you're out of the reach of that SEQ regional plan. So you then come back to your local planning instrument only. You're not captured by that prohibition on subdivision. So the urban
mm,
footprint is only confined to the SEQ region. And as I said, that sort of captures up to
mm.
Gympie and out to Toowoomba.
Yeah, that's good to know. So first point of call to head to see whether there are any particular state interests. If there are no colours and hatchings and it looks like that grey and white bit, you've gone through it,
Absolutely. Yeah.
pretty good idea that you can do something there, then it's the next step.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, what this does is it just narrows down your areas of I suppose, further investigation. And
Mm.
coming back to the who, in terms of who are you dealing with, if you've got a site where you're all grey on this particular map, you're just dealing with the local authority. You don't have to deal with the state
Mm.
environmental department or the state transport department because you're near a state controlled road or a tunnel or those sorts of things. Now, obviously, just even on this map extract, again, because it's a highly urbanised area here in South Brisbane, you don't see a lot of green other than the Brisbane River, which is funny because the river's brown. But the if you were to look at subdivision opportunities outside of the inner city, so if you're doing say 1 into 2 subdivisions, where you might be say Red Hill in Brisbane or down towards Springwood, but you're in an urban area, then your mapping will look very much like that extract on the screen. If you're starting to find yourself looking at subdivision opportunities and projects further afield and starting to get into those larger lots, what you'll find is that this state map will start to show more state vegetation, which is all different colours, and the koala vegetation as well. And that's where this is pretty critical, because you might see a site as in the urban footprint, you might see development all around you, but there's a couple of trees that might be scattered across the site. So you use this map to try and hone down, are there any state interests of environmental value,
Mm.
be it regulated vegetation or koalas, that would cause an issue later on, because depending if you do have, say, a koala map overlay, you may very well fall back into that prohibited development, a category of development, which I had that quick screen on before, meaning you can't even make an application. So as much as our planning system in here in Queensland is performance-based, and you can go, okay, well, I don't quite comply here, but here's a good alternative as to why I think I comply. Where you are prohibited, you can't do that at all. So the state mapping is critical to determining, are you going to be captured by the threat or the potential of a prohibition from an environmental layer later on.
Yeah, yeah. So simply stay away from the green stuff, the pink stuff, and anything that's multicolored.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you do find your site has all these different layers on it, you talk to someone like me and we try to navigate it through. Because certainly not all of these things are bad. Some of these things are opportunities, because where you start to see public transport, state public transport as mapped here, that may actually give you an uplift in terms of residential density or the ability to create some smaller lots, because you're creating an infill opportunity. So the layers don't always necessarily mean they're a bad thing, but more often than not, you just want to keep it as easy as possible. And by keeping it easy as possible, you streamline your DA process.
Fantastic. And then, so once you've done the state thing, where to
Yep.
next?
So once you've done the state thing, you go to your local government, your local planning instrument. Now, this is just a screenshot of the landing page at Brisbane City Council, just to give you guys an idea. It's a city plan link there. As I said, most councils will have their interactive mapping available, but you can use this to find property reports. So you'll be able to type in a street address, or you do a map search. And once you go through that opening screen, you start to generate the mapping. There's generally click functions everywhere that you can find your site, have a couple of clicks, it'll pull up details about its zoning, its areas, sometimes whether it's encumbered by easements. And then from there, you can choose your own adventure as to where you go in terms of the information sources. Most of them will start to link back towards elements of the plan scheme, but it's a good way to get that initial impression as to, okay, do I have a residential zone, or am I like a rural res or emerging community future urban zone? Are there any overlays? Do we have a local environmental overlay, or is there a building height overlay? And these things that might influence whether or not you feel that this is a good opportunity to proceed or not. So from there, the site assessment can continue. And now this is a Moreton Bay example. And I've used this, again, just to show that they all kind of look a little bit different, but they fulfill the same function. And what I'm suggesting here on this one is that do property searches of surrounding land. So If you're looking at a parcel of land that you think has some development potential, it might be a larger block of land, and you go, great, I want to subdivide this because I've just seen this development and the subdivision happening 2 doors down. You can actually use these tools to, look into that old application or that more recent application, see how council possibly assessed it, see what issues that developer may have had to encounter, how they overcame that, what consultants that they needed to engage. Was there a specific issue, like possibly an air quality issue or a bushfire management issue? So you can start to do your research about, okay, if we are to proceed with the development of this block of land, I've already got an idea as to who I need to be speaking to, where council's head is at in terms of subdivision. Were they against it the whole way through, and can you see that this was a real challenge for that last developer, or was it quite kind of seamless? Provided that they had all these different reports and plans and alignment, did that application go through seamlessly? So I think it's really valuable to do that research of the immediate vicinity, not just the site that you might be interested in subdividing, but what might be happening around in terms of other applications and approvals.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that it's to make sure that you don't have your blinkers on when you're looking at a site, because there might be other opportunities around as well. Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and look, if someone's passed the course of the approval for you in terms of, you might even see yourself as having, or the site you're looking at, as having a particular overlay or a particular issue, maybe about where its access point comes from or the shape of the lots. And you've gone, okay, well, how are we going to navigate this? Because, the mapping seems to be quite clear. I can see trees on the site. I can see it's green on the map. But how do we navigate this? And if someone's gone through and been able to do some preliminary investigations that sort of shows that, well, look, the mapping's probably not right in terms of the habitat values, it then gives you some hope that while you're engaging an ecologist, you might better ground truth the vegetation a little bit more, and you're going into that process, I guess, with a bit of comfort that you're not wasting money or wasting time and just hoping for the best, because there has been some successful habitat mapping in the area, and possibly it's a case that from there you can demonstrate that as much as sites might be mapped or that there might be trees, that they possibly don't form an environmental corridor as that the scheme drafters may have contemplated at the time.
Got it. We've got a question here. Tim, does the SARA DA planning site show future planned infrastructure or just existing infrastructure?
No, good question. It actually shows both. So from a transport perspective anyway. So the SARA mapping will show all of the state interest, which is state-controlled roads in that sense, and that infrastructure. It will also show future state-controlled roads and future state-controlled tunnels and those sorts of things. Now, the trick to that is that there are some road corridors that we know about that aren't yet gazetted as future state-controlled roads, so they won't appear. So there's a couple of roads through Moreton Bay. There's a lot of discussion about the new Bruce Highway Western Alternative, and that's only come out in the last couple of weeks. There's some stuff through Logan around Park Ridge as well. We know that the state has an interest in some of these road corridors, but because they're not gazetted yet, they won't appear. However, when we can see things like Cross River Rail, although that's a Brisbane City Council project, there are some state projects coming off that. So that will appear, particularly with tunnels and public transport, those sorts of things. So it will show to a certain extent some of that future planned infrastructure, but I suppose be mindful of the fact that there might be other state projects kind of in the background, haven't quite got to gazette through Parliament, and therefore they won't appear on the maps.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good answer. Love it. Where are we going to next, Tim?
Where we go next? Still on site assessment, because I think this is the real important stuff, because at the end of the day, you guys want to be able to find all of the information at hand, start to make your own decisions. By no means, exclude talking to other experts and peers and so forth, but you want to be able to do your own initial assessments so that you're not, going to your project team every 5 minutes, every time you see something on realestate.com. You want to be able to do that self-exploration. So, what is also useful to try and look for is whether a council or a regional council or a city council that you're dealing with, if they've got a subscription service. And I guess if you are finding yourself doing more and more and more projects in those local government areas, whether or not there's an opportunity for you to make that subscription. I guess the case that we've got here is Brisbane City Council's e-BIMAP system. Now, it's probably a little bit unaffordable for most people, but fortunately, consultants will all subscribe to this. So this is where building your project team and building on those relationships with planners and engineers and then like that you trust, we can use these subscriptions that we have to find more information. So some councils won't have this, some will, as I said. I guess in Brisbane's example, which is what this e-BIMAP does, we can see a lot more infrastructure mapping through property connections, stormwater, and there's a whole lot of this stuff that doesn't appear on the city plan interface. So it's an evolution of more detail to the stuff that city plan won't show. Other local authorities, though, and I'm thinking Moreton Bay, you can probably get a fair bit of information without having a subscription service, because Uni Water will have their water and sewer assets available through their free mapping. And the Moreton Bay Council also has their own ArcGIS suite of maps, which includes things like their stormwater assets. Those things won't normally appear in their planning scheme maps, but between those different websites, you can start to build that picture of all of those infrastructure items that you might be interested to find out, what exists in terms of, sewer manholes and water connections and where the closest regional stormwater basin is and those sorts of things. So this was more just I suppose a heads up that if you are dealing with consultants, see if they've got access to any subscription-based services across the local authorities that you're dealing with, because you might just better get a little bit more information that you can't see at that public interface. I think I'm getting near the end of the presentation, but this is just, again, an extract of the Uni Water mapping that I was referring to. So this is this is the part of the Redcliffe Peninsula. It's in the Moreton Bay region, but the water and sewer assets are governed by Uni Water. So this is the Uni Water map. And again, this is a free website you can freely access. As you can see from here, you can pick up all of your valves, manholes, pipes, and you can click on each particular asset and infrastructure to get to the point where you can see that you have a manhole at a particular RL, you've got a pipe which comes in and it's 150 millimeter PVC. So you can get a hold of this information for free and navigate a way around. And that will give you a good picture as to, look, if you are then starting to subdivide, you can start to form some good views as to whether or not there's sufficient capacity to network. If you can see there's a really small pipe and you're trying to subdivide into maybe 5 lots, you can start to then put some thought to, okay, do we need to do some external upgrades? Otherwise, you're going to be pretty well okay.
And how does this differ or complement sort of dial before you dig?
Look, dial before you dig is useful because you want to be able to know what is nearby, but dial before you dig isn't entirely accurate. Like, it's pretty good. Like, you want to be able to know, okay, here's my block of land. If I'm going to be starting to subdivide, I need to know that there's a sewer running through it or some telecommunications or whatever. You'll only ever truly find out where that stuff exactly is by engaging the services of a utility scanner, which is effectively a surveyor for underground. These guys run around, they look like lawnmowers, but it's just radar penetrating equipment, and it really picks up with a high degree of accuracy where all of your pipes are, where your cables are, and those sorts of things, and the depths where they sit. So dial before you dig is useful. It runs a very similar system to what this one here is. So this water and sewer mapping that you can see on the screen, the actual alignment of those pipes is largely a guess. However, when you get to a manhole and you can see that the manhole has an invert level at a certain depth or height, you know that that's going to be pretty well accurate because that's all surveyed data. So it's all using the tools that we've got in context to start making those informed decisions about how encumbered is my site before I start to subdivide? What is the likely capacity going to be? And we're going to be hit with external upgrades and so forth.
Fantastic. Excellent.
And I
We're
think
we're nearing the end here.
we are
And
nearly the end. So
and again, anyone that has questions or thoughts or comments, please pop them in the comment section below as we start to sort of bring this all together.
so look, these are just some key thoughts, and some of them are repeats of what we've discussed. But first one is, look, just attain that basic understanding and familiarity with the regulatory framework which you're working in. So it's coming back to, okay, who's going to be the decision maker? Do I need to look at the EDQs, product development area, or am I looking at the local government plan scheme? Do I have those state interests? So use all of those available tools that I've shown you. And look, this is by no means an exhaustive list of all those tools. As I said, most of those councils will have various mapping available. And as much as it might not be immediately apparent at the front interface of the council website, do a search, because you might find a great little link to stormwater infrastructure or some other background extrinsic material which is relevant when you're doing subdivisions or development. Consider things like topography, access, and aspect. Haven't really spoken on that in great detail, but in terms of mastering a subdivision, you want to know, are you falling to the street? Are you falling away from the street? You might find yourself a great opportunity for a quick little 1-2 subdivision. You go, this is great. No constraints. I've got good road frontage. But if it falls away to the rear, you've got to deal with your stormwater somehow. And that obviously adds to the complexity, because you can start to involve adjoining property owners. So it's consider all of those things. And one of the maps I haven't shown tonight is contour mapping. Contour mapping is quite often available through those local authorities. So even at that desktop view, you can start to see and get a picture for where your site falls, to know whether or not stormwater is going to be an engineering issue or not.
That was
Assemble
Geography 101, wasn't it, Tim?
it
You were
is. It
listening.
is.
When the
Absolutely.
lines are close together, that
It's
means it's
steep.
steep. Yes,
Yes.
there you go.
Or you don't have enough contours turned on, possibly as
Yeah.
well. So, the other key one there is assemble the experienced project team. I guess that is pretty important. And look, we'd all be doing that anyway, through whatever business that we do. You've got your consultants, your peers, your contacts that you rely on and trust. Keep those close by and handy, because engaging with a planner for a 15-20 minute phone call or email discussion and a couple of quick searches might save you hours of unnecessary searches and time spent doing DD for possibly an opportunity that doesn't quite sort of stack up to what you want. But you also need that project team to help navigate the application process once you do land on that site and do commit to running the development. Identify the decision makers. I've sort of touched on that. Just as you engage with your project team early, you want to engage with the decision makers early. Most councils, and I'm assuming this is the same interstate as well, will have a pre-lodgment service where they will be happy to sit down, discuss development concepts with you prior to making the application. And that's a great opportunity just to square away any particular local nuances, whether they want a particular report, whether they want a plan designed in a particular way. So once you make your application, you're not being asked to make amendments or supply a lot of more information during that assessment time. That kind of follows into isolate areas of non-compliance. It's not always, going to be a case where you tick every box against the code. You're going to find yourselves at a point where you don't hit a minimum frontage or a minimum area, or you don't do something. And it shouldn't necessarily be a showstopper. You should be able to work a way around it. And quite often, through the performance-based planning system that we have in Queensland, at least, you can propose alternatives to achieve the policy outcome. So it's identifying those areas of non-compliance and whether or not your project team can form those cogent arguments to go, okay, well, you know what? We don't have the 600 square metre lot. We're at 580 square metres, but we are that because of these reasons. We're
Mm.
not impacting the ability for the site to be developed with a dwelling house, and we're not doing a subdivision which is out of character. And you can start to build that kind of argument with the council and get them on board early.
Mm.
Um, Preparing a development application with a lot of material is useful. Again, this comes from my experience in both private sector and local government sector. The more information that you give the council up front as part of the application, just the easier it is to assess, because you're not teasing out information and amendments through the DA process. You're trying to come in with all the information up front and make the council officer's job as easy as possible to assess. Um, Second last point is pretty obvious, but it's always hard to get, is parity across all the different consultants. Now, I know that we're all engaging with different consultants at the exact same time. We're all rushing to get to our project milestones. I'm speaking from current experience because we're all doing this right now in the lead up to Christmas. So you've got an engineering report coming in, you've got an ecology report coming in, you've got a traffic report coming in.
Mm.
Make sure that they're all talking about the same thing. Make sure we're
Yep.
not conflicting with each other. Because all of a sudden you might have good traffic grounds for a subdivision, good ecological grounds for a subdivision, good engineering grounds for a subdivision. But if some of these specialists and experts are conflicting with each other,
Mm.
then
Mm.
all of a sudden the subdivision opportunity is really detrimentally affected. And then, just communication, illustration, and articulation of your arguments. So, again, it's all just coming back to that information of being well informed, having that project team all on the same page, and you're working towards that one result.
Fantastic, Tim. So, for those of you who are looking at doing subdivisions in Queensland, obviously Tim's got a bit of knowledge around it. That was fabulous. That was a wealth of information, and I know you could have kept going on in terms of the details, but this is sort of the higher level. If you're not doing these already, and these are things that you can do yourself on a desktop.
Mm,
That's the key thing, because developers constantly looking for projects, but that doesn't remove the fact that you need to, like you've mentioned a few times, have
mm,
your core team around you, have your
mm.
core team of consultants. So what are the areas that you look at in DTS, Tim, and your role?
Yeah, so my role at DTS, I'm one of the planning managers here. We're a smallish team of around about 9 to 10 town planners, but we are largely a surveying and urban design firm as well. So we've got the ability to draft up subdivision plans, draft up
Mm.
ROL plans for your development applications, do the survey, and bring all of those skill sets together. But my day-to-day stuff is running my part of the planning team. It's working with my clients to do exactly as I explained tonight. My clients will come to me and go, "Great, Tim, found the site, found this opportunity." And I'll go through and I'll work out, are the state interests going to be insurmountable to a subdivision
Mm.
opportunity? What does the local plan scheme say? Are we in the infrastructure area? And then start to formulate the strategies around how do we overcome any of these potential barriers or constraints as we see them on a plan. Obviously, I prefer the sites that my clients bring to me, which is flat, rectangular, no trees, no koalas. Okay, that's great. Those ones are easy, but they aren't there. The
Yep.
easy stuff is hard to find. So
Mm.
there's always the land where you go, okay, well, look, most of it's gone okay. I'm in the right zone and I've got good aspect and I've got a good area, but there's a couple of trees at the back. And so we can
Mm.
look at the opportunities of going, okay, well, the trees aren't mapped. So, through the various exemptions in the framework, we think that shouldn't be an issue. Or if we can see some real pertinent showstoppers, we can draw upon our network of consultants as well to put our clients in contact with possibly the ecologist or the stormwater
Mm.
engineer or whoever they might need to speak to if they don't have those contacts in play to try and resolve those issues to a point that we can all move forward with the next step of possibly plan drafting and then start to have that initial dialogue with the local authority.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for your time putting that all together. That was excellent. I learnt a few things from it, which is good. I'm always keen to broaden my own knowledge. And there was a lot in there. So you've applied yourself well from high school. high school days. Indeed. So thank you. I appreciate you sharing. That sort of wraps up our evening and the presentation for today. So thank you for those of you that have joined us today. If you want to get in contact with Tim, there are his details on the screen
Yep,
there, mobile
absolutely.
phone, email. He is also on in Facebook land. But yeah, it's a busy time, so maybe projects for next year. Yeah.
Always happy to talk, but yeah, it's Christmas can't come soon enough for most of us, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us on the business of property. We'll see you again soon. Have a fantastic Christmas, Tim. I'll see you in the new year and everyone
Yeah,
else
thanks,
as
Sam.
well. Next week will be our last episode of the business of property. Make sure you visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to find any of our past business of property videos. And if you found value in our show, please subscribe as well. So until next week, we shall see you again. Ciao, ciao. Thanks, Tim.
See you
Thanks,
around.
everyone. Bye bye.